Okay. Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of WhickTV, cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious, and we are here to debate on whether or not capitalism is racist. Is it something that will invariably and inevitably lead to racial disparities? Or is it a tool, perhaps, that will actually combat racism? Is capitalism anti-racist? We were going to have a 2v2, me and Irrelevant versus a gentleman by the name of 𝕲𝖓 and our friend 𝕾𝖍𝖎 here. But Aston hasn't gotten back to me. I don't know where he is. I hope he is doing well. But given the fact that he's not here, I am going to take a more moderator role, and I'm going to let these two gentlemen talk and discuss. I will be interjecting with questions here and there. But I want to, first of all, thank you both for coming here. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing all right. I mean, I usually wake up about an hour for these early for these things. That way, I can make sure I'm in a good place for it. However, I woke up an hour early to finding out that a package that I really wanted delivered to me was possibly delivered to the wrong address. Some issues going down, and I was on the phone when I entered the call trying to figure out that whole situation. It's an absolute mess. So, but I'm
Well,
happy to
I
be here.
hope I hope it can get resolved in your favor. That's always frustrating. I had a birthday recently, and my mom sent me a package of cookies that never arrived. It just never showed up.
Wow.
We had a tracking number. It got lost in translation somewhere. Um, Luckily, I was able to get more cookies. She sent me another box. It worked out, but still, it was frustrating and it was annoying. 𝕾𝖍𝖎, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm just chilling,
Just
not doing too
chilling,
much.
just doing okay. Okay, well,
Yeah.
again, thanks for being a little bit of a last minute replacement here. Gang, today has been scuffed. Nine Tails and Aston came to me with this topic. They wanted a debate. They wanted a 2v2, and it looks like neither of them are going to show. So 𝕾𝖍𝖎 has thankfully, right, graciously taken up this mantle and is willing to talk to us. And thanks to Non-Smoker as well for recommending him. So I really appreciate both of these individuals. Okay, and with that, let's get into it. I'm going to let 𝕾𝖍𝖎, you're going to start and tell us why you think capitalism is racist. Go ahead.
So when we talk about capitalism being racist, right? We have to talk about okay. You have to understand that race and class, in terms of America's scope, particularly we're focusing in America. I think there's always been race and class have been tied together. You can tie this back to slavery with slaves and slave masters, and obviously the slaves in America were black, and you talk about mostly white slave masters. So you have I guess you could say you have more, more, you have more people on the lower end than on the higher end in terms of master slave dichotomy. But then when you talk about the transition to capitalism, it still maintains that economy. You just don't call it master slave, you call it employer employee. So, really, in terms of it being racist, it's a matter of the whole goal of capitalism is profit. And because of the class society that you built off the precipice of your slave society, you, you still have those racial inequalities and the racial inequities. So, that's just a little bit of it.
Okay, well, that'll do to start, I guess, and we'll get into it. Irrelevant, what's your opening thoughts here?
I mean, I don't believe capitalism is inherently racist. I don't think there's anything about it that can be correlated to being inherently racist. There are things inside of it that can correlate to it maybe possibly exacerbating racism in some ways, but I'm sorry, I look like a fucking angel right now. Give me 1 second. Um, the However, I think for the most part, capitalism actually has great means of being able to mitigate some of the effects of racism. Historically, we've seen some large businesses push against racism because there is actually a capital interest in including diverse groups of people inside of the markets. Who would have thought you make money when you appeal to millions of people? So yeah, I would argue that there is nothing inherently racist about capitalism, and in fact, that we should look more to our social structure and cultural issues rather than economic system.
Okay. And with that, I guess we'll get into the back and forth. I guess to start, uh, 𝕬𝖎, you said that this is built off the backs, at least in the American context, of slavery and the slave master dichotomy. Do you think that the capitalist system that we have has to have that kind of a dichotomy, or is it simply a matter of historical accident almost that we come from a system that was racist and therefore it kind of bled into the capitalist system? What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I mean, just do I wait? Repeat the question again. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, my
Is
bad.
the master slave dichotomy necessary to today's capitalism, right? Or is it just a historical artifact from before, right?
I
Does
mean,
that
it
make sense?
just yeah, it makes sense. I'm just saying it just transitioned to employer employee. I'm just saying all you did was change the titles. The power still belongs in the hands of the few.
In the case of the powers still belonging in the hands of the few, that doesn't really inform us about a racist claim like racism, right? So I could agree with the idea that there is a significant amount of power in a few people's hands as a result of capital wealth being hoarded by these individuals. But how do we then get to it is inherently racist and nothing can change the fact that it's racist? We have to completely change our economic system.
Because the social, like you said before, the social structure was racist, right?
Yes, I believe the
It
social
doesn't.
structure is racist.
But the social structure also affects the economic structure too.
Correct.
Yeah, so why wouldn't it?
Well,
So
by that same turn, if we were to try any other economic system, our social structure would affect it and it would be de facto racist. And that's my belief. If every single place on earth became socialist overnight, racism would still exist because the root of it isn't in the economic system. The root of it is our social outlook on each other.
that assumes to me that you're keep maintaining class structure.
Do you think if you don't maintain class structure, racism goes away?
Well, it depends. I would say class is part of the problem.
I could probably agree with the idea that class is a part of the problem, but I think the issue more so with class is the ideas that we have around class more so than the class itself. But that kind of is a separate conversation because if we agree with the idea that class isn't the whole problem, but it's just part of the problem, my whole point here is to say that capitalism isn't inherently racist. That's it. That you can have a system like capitalism and exist in a world where in which there is very little to almost no racism. I personally don't believe there's ever going to be absolutely no racism, but very little racism. You can exist in that, and especially you can exist in other economic systems such as socialism, communism. Maybe closer to a state capitalism, whatever, right? And there will still be racism in these systems. I think because the root is social, not economic.
But why? I guess what I would say is that that doesn't tell the full story. If you're gonna leave the economics out of it,
Why is that?
I mean, you take a look at, like I said, even before slavery, what do you have now that's the similar counterpart? You have mass incarceration and prison labor. You
Do
have
you think
overthrow.
mass incarceration and prison labor wouldn't exist if we lived in a socialist system? I'm sorry.
Depends.
Are you a socialist? I'm sorry. I want to understand like
Uh,
where I'm trying to push these arguments because if I'm
I guess you
I'm
could. I guess you could. I guess you could say that for the time being. We could say
okay.
that.
Okay, sure. So do you think it would exist in a socialist system?
Probably, but not the way it exists now. I mean, we're not talking about like um, prison labor for corporations. We're not talking about that
Why wouldn't that exist?
because it's not a. That's not the goal. You're not trying to make it about profit.
In a
Because right now,
socialist system, you're not trying to make it about profit?
in
Because
state
to my
in
knowledge,
state run,
oh, okay, wait. Are you talking about state socialism? Like, okay, so maybe we can
Yeah,
define.
let's take a step back. What are you advocating for, actually, 𝕬𝖎? What do you think is a better system than capitalism that you are uh trying to advocate that would have less racism or be less racist?
I would say. I guess I would say more so of a. I guess you could say more of a like sort of more so like a black anarchist system. Like that's it's a little different, but it's
Black
more.
Yeah,
anarchists.
what is a black anarchist system?
So all it really is like you're at the basis. I'm trying to keep it brief. I'm not trying to go too deep, but
There's only two of you. You can go a little deep. It's okay.
Yeah.
okay. So so really, just like you're the goal really over, overthrow a state. You know, um, obviously eventually overthrow capitalism. You know, and really some examples would be I guess the main control I say is community control of the black community, where it's like winning liberated zones away from occupying entities like the police, um, actual control over schools, to where we could actually actually teach like detailed Black history,
Okay.
things like that. So really,
Okay.
it's
Can I interject there, or do you want to keep
yeah,
going?
yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I think probably the greatest way to ensure the most harm to black people is to do an overthrow of the state with black people. I think that is the fastest way to
Why?
expedite because I believe it is the fastest way to expedite the significant control that white white power movements might have because they've been itching for the civil war that they've been amping up this idea that is happening and for black people in mass to push back against the government. I feel like this is a really easy win for white nationalists and white supremacists to be able to say that we're all like violent and to just essentially target us as a unified monolith that is anti-state and like these outsiders that are going to constantly be a threat to civilized society. I think the idea of racially uprising is not really a good one. If we want to talk about ideologically uprising, that's something that's a little bit more, I think, something that maybe could be done, but I very much wouldn't prefer it again because there's probably going to be a bunch of people who try and resist, and then in resistance there will be significant loss of life that I just think is unnecessary.
Um, I mean, if they're really gonna have the conversation about loss of life, I mean that wouldn't be the first time. But I'm not making it so like the idea of autonomy is separate. Like Black autonomy is not separatist at all. It's not like I'm not saying it's just black people. I'm just framing it as
Oh,
just from a black perspective. It's not just black people,
okay.
but but the whole point is that it's everybody had like it's black people, white, everybody together, but understanding that yeah, black folks we're gonna handle our business first. You see what I mean? Like we're gonna handle our business first,
Okay.
and then like I said, we can't put our shit to the side. You know,
Okay, so we handle black people's business first. How does that prevent racism inside of the workplace, interpersonally, and things like that? Like, I don't know how a white person who's interacting with black people and just thinks that maybe they just don't work as hard because they're not just, lazy or something like that. I don't know how that in their idea in their mind goes away after this happens. I can grant the idea even that it happens, it's successful, a bunch of people get behind, you know, this movement and the government is overthrown. How do you prevent interpersonal racism, especially in a democratic workplace, that seeps in to their day-to-day life, into the economy? How do you prevent that from happening?
you minimize it the best way you know how. But then to truly prevent, I mean, racism is learned.
Yep.
It has to be. You have to take time to unlearn behavior. So
Right.
you can prevent it. It may not be in that isolated interaction, but you can definitely prevent it as a matter of precedent. So over over time, it can be prevented.
I agree with
I
that.
know. Look, I know it's not going to be this instantaneous thing. I know it's not going to be. Um, but there
Can
is
you
a certain, yeah.
Okay, how do you unlearn racism?
I unlearn racism. I
Broadly, I don't necessarily, I'm not trying to like trap you on like a curriculum or
I'm
anything
just
like that.
you unlearn like you unlearn all the other biases like interaction.
Hmm. Yep, exposure. What is it? I think there's a term.
Exposure
There's like a
therapy and
say.
psychology. Yeah, exposure
Yeah,
therapy and
it's
psychology.
like exposure is the enemy of bias or something like that. There's like a term or saying for it. But okay, I agree with that. Why don't we do that in capitalism?
We don't we do it, but we don't like. There's always distractions. So in like in terms of like what the political class, the political system itself, this red blue divide that's really stupid. Um, you talk about a like I said, a mainly capitalist class that ends up being for the most part diverse, but there are different realms within that capitalist class. So I mean, there is racism in that there are those who are black like myself that are wealthy, but then again, their class status their class status in a way prevents them from truly being pro-black with black work with everyday black people. So it's more.
Um.
Well,
I- I-
let him finish before
oh, okay.
we ask a question. But yeah, give him some space. Go ahead.
It's both. It's a class divide that ends up becoming anti-black. It's not just anti-black, but it ends up becoming that way. Especially when you have black people who are used as tokens who have that sort of class that have a higher class status like your Oprahs and people like that.
Okay. Um. So, uh, I guess I had a couple of questions off that because these class divides that you're referring to, uh, I agree that they can be potentially problematic for individuals who have significant wealth to be able to understand, empathize, and also feel a desire to work with individuals who are like lower on the totem pole. But again, I don't see this as inherently racist, right? So if we teach in this circumstance on the original question, if we try and help people unlearn racism, we try and expose them to different groups of people and try and eliminate these biases. I could see a world where in which we are again, I don't truly believe in a world where there is literally no racism, but one where in which it's mitigated so much that for the most part it's not that big of a deal in day-to-day life. I could absolutely see that being the case. Um and I don't think that because there is people on a higher tier on the totem pole and people who are lower, that means that it will like I don't understand the connection there. If we teach individual people and we expose individual people towards the diverse ideas or being around different types of people, how would in your mind racism still be nearly as prevalent as it is today?
I mean, when you talk about everybody class statuses, you have to remember you're gonna associate with whoever's in your class more.
Sure.
So if I'm just everyday person talk to another white person or talk to a white person or who's in my class who's in the same social class as me, right? I mean, that person, even if they even if they were racist, they may not be racist toward me. Like it's one of those over time just interacting with people in the same class as you. Now it's more of an internal class issue with racism and how you have a an elite that uses that racism to divide the lower classes who are in greater number than they are. So that's what I mean when I say it's part of it.
So what
It's more about an issue of an internal class divide. But like we said, racism is learned. So
okay, so it's more about the internal class divide. When you're referring to the internal class divide, what exactly are you talking about? Because when you talked about these higher up people dividing the individuals and trying to create those situations, and even in my mind when you were previously talking about distractions, what comes to the forefront of my thinking is like, are you talking about like Fox News and stuff like that, where they'll like try and put up stories of uh certain areas committing crime and like use I forget the term for it, but there's like words like super predators, or urban threat, and stuff like this. Is this what you're primarily referring to, or what are you referring to when you're talking about creating a class divide?
I mean, it can be media. It can be basically be whatever. I mean, it can be media. Uh, it can be in public. It could be how some policies, but it could be whatever. I mean, the point is these elites that are multicolored elites themselves. Again, there are different degrees within them too. But if we're talking about everyday people who are around each other, race is used as a weapon to divide them, to divide everyday people, or it can be done through this political system too, through this red blue nonsense of liberal conservative,
If I may,
stuff like
if
that.
I
Yeah.
may ask, 𝕬𝖍, how will that be, or how would that be substantively different under another economic system? So, say capitalism did not exist, right? Or we switched from capitalism to socialism or to some other form of economic governance. What would fundamentally change so that that would not happen? How, in your mind, does capitalism exacerbate this racial tension?
Well, capitalism uses, like I said, capitalism The whole the whole point really is to keep the elite as rich as possible. So if so, the way to maintain that is to keep everyday PT, the proletariat, where they're at. So they know these elites know there's more of everyday people than there are of them. It's the same dichotomy it's the same issue with slavery. Contradictions of slavery catch caught up to it too. It's just after in a different system, you're not you're effectively getting rid of that. So you're trying to talk about real democracy for people. Like you're talking about real like horizontal structures. You're talking about real like where people are responsible, where people where elected officials, well, quote unquote people who are appointed are actually responsible directly to people. You're talking about real direct democracy, not some blue institutional nonsense. And even you see it every day with people being worn out with this political system. People are truly worn out. I mean, we're looking like we're heading into Biden Trump part two. Like, how much of the country really wants that?
Um, so you're speaking a lot about what the elites want, and for me, because we're talking about economic systems, the things that these elite want, I don't think would be any different even in a socialist system. The difference would be instead of an elite, it's the company that the elite represents. So part of the reason why the elite wants this system is because it makes them a lot of money, right? To be able to perpetuate something about this system, whatever it might be. Let's say their stranglehold over the plastics market or pharmaceutical market, whatever it might be. If we assume that these elites are gone and it is democratic control of these companies, the same exact thing would apply for the workers of that company because they would be making massive profits off the state of affairs. So if what you're telling me is the reason why racism is still so full in effect is because essentially people make a lot of fucking money off of it, then what you're going to change is instead of, let's say, 10,000 people making a lot of money off of um, racism, now we got 300 million people making a lot of money off of racism. So we have no social incentive to get rid of it at all. Because everybody, you're profiting off of racism, he's profiting off of racism, she's profiting off of racism, we're all profiting off of racism, except for maybe just a couple of, black people. But it is what it is, so for the most part, should I care? I'm making 20% more at the end of the year, 10% more at the end of the year. My kids get to go to a better school. I get to have a better car and stuff like that. Instead of in the system that we currently have, where we can do things like you're doing, where we can point fingers at the elite, hopefully get the proletariat mobilized on the idea of like maybe putting in some, where necessary, better worker protections and things like that. In my opinion, again, I think this problem is primarily social and it is completely um, upstream of economic issues, right? I think if we swap the system, racism would still be in full in effect. But especially if we swap the system to socialism, all I see is that there's going to be a lot of people profiting off of racism. So there's no way that we're going to
The
have incentive to
question,
change it.
the question for you, irrelevant.
Yep.
Given though that the economic system does influence social system and vice versa, can we not see how that at least today, as it exists, the capitalism we have allows us to exploit the outgroup, and how that manifests today is we generally it's not so much anti-black racism that happens, but more anti Southeast Asian racism that happens. We're exploiting whole countries, Thailand, Vietnam, etc., where we have sweatshops, things like that, that we rake in immense profits because of that. And so the reason that we are able to do that is because of the capitalist structures that are in place that incentivize us doing this in places where we cannot see, right? Because it doesn't sell. Racism doesn't sell, I'd agree, but what it does is it encourages us to do the certain less palatable procedures kind of out of sight. And what that manifests as is people in different countries that are not the US getting the shaft. So how does that not at least uphold some kind of systemic racism worldwide?
Um, I would say that's not necessarily a consequence of capitalism. I think in a system where, from my point of view, all that the social control of the means of production means is there's more people who profit. That's it, right? So when we're talking about like sweatshops and things like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk up to, essentially, I'm going to walk up to, let's say, 100,000 workers that might be working in a corporation, and I'm going to say, hey, do you want 10% more cash to turn a blind eye towards individuals who are suffering in these separate countries for running a sweatshop? And they're going to be like, yeah, absolutely. I want to buy a new car. That's it. Full stop. They're not going to care. Straight up. They're just not going to care. All right? They don't even care what's happening in the next state over, let alone in the next country that's halfway across the world. They don't care. They want that new car. They want that 10% raise. And I think that there are great examples of this, and I think one of the great examples is, unfortunately, we saw maybe me and 𝕾𝖎𝖙 can agree on the idea that like Bernie Sanders seemed like a cool candidate. Do you like Bernie Sanders, 𝕾𝖎𝖏?
He was all right.
But at least he was like better than Biden in your eyes, right?
Yeah, yeah. That is too setting the bar low too.
Sure. So either way, I was a fan of the Sandman, and one of the issues is the one of the toughest things that I saw him have to grapple with is his Medicare for all. The way that he would cover it is he talked about increasing taxes, even though overall per individual you'd be paying less money with his plan. So the issue with this was that when he would say, I am raising taxes, just that alone would get so many people scared. You could see the other people in these political debates constantly get him to say, how are you going to pay for that? You're going to need to raise taxes. You're going to need to raise taxes. And people run scared of it. So I think, in my mind, all this shows is that at the end of the day, people just want to keep their money, as much money as possible to them. That's their number one priority. I don't see why that would change inside of a socialist system. I think people are going to turn a blind eye to horrible atrocities if they get paid money for it, just like capital owners do right now.
If you're focusing the system, if you're changing away from a capitalist mode of production to a system where you focus on social good, and in terms of, like I used the example with, as black people, when we talk about focusing on social systems that are a benefit to our communities, whether it is engaging in ownership of education, engaging in like ownership of schools, actually institutions that are within our communities. You don't make it about, it's not solely about profit at the cost of someone else, like profit at the undercutting of your employees themselves. It's really about the greater benefit. You're changing the model. Instead of it being for profit, you're changing it to focus more on the societal good aspect. You're trying to steer away from that profit motive, because you're not just sitting there just accumulating money and accumulating resources. You're trying to improve communities. You're taking more of a social ownership and community ownership of communities.
Oh, personally, when I view the differences between these modes, I completely disagree. I think all of the actions that we see of capital owners are incredibly understandable, and we ourselves would do them if we were capital owners. I think one of the most ridiculous ideas is that these capital owners are like this different group of people that are like so incredibly like narcissistic or egotistical that they're doing this crazy thing. If I Again, in my mind, if I put a deal in front of you to make 15% more annually, to fuck over a group of people, you will take it. By and large, you will take it. Okay. That's how I view it. Especially, you will take it when you have pressure from your peers. So you may feel uncomfortable taking it, but at the end of the day, it's a democratic workplace, and you need to look every single person in your workplace in the eye and say, you're not going to get a 15% raise on your annual salary because of my ethical concerns. And if that's going to cause massive havoc and massive problems, it's probably just not going to happen. You're probably going to constantly default to the idea of this is a business. Our number one concern is making money and making profits. If we want regulation with what we can and can't do, it should come from the government. And I believe that's how it should work. Because corporations and businesses, no matter if they're socially run or not, will always be at the interest of their profits, whether it be towards their employees or towards the capital owners. It will always work that way. We should focus on systems of government to be able to regulate them as business bodies. My opinion on that.
Response?
So you would favor more of a socially democratic structure then?
I'm a SOCDEM. I believe in mixed economies. I think that social, like co-ops, socially democratically run businesses can work, and I support them wholeheartedly. But I do not believe that it is the solution, the true end-all solution to any problem at all. Because I think that that system, the only thing that I could see socialism being a solution to is being able to easily distribute money to the employees. So it's like easier when it comes to payday. But other than that, like no, I don't think it's I think capitalism can achieve all of the benefits of socialism without needing to enforce it ubiquitously.
Why is that wrong? Why must we dismantle capitalism in order to solve these problems? Could we not solve it within capitalism? What about capitalism perpetuates these problems?
Well, it goes back to, it goes back to capitalism's own contradictions. I mean, if we would talk about just the idea of basically the idea of grow or die with some of these corporations, the idea of grow or die. You can't infinitely grow in a finite space. And when we talk about some of the opportunity costs taken. I mean, we see oftentimes food deserts or different types of other environmental racism, particularly affects communities of color. So one example of this would be more so scenario like corner store connected to a gas station, like you'd have places of unhealthy food that mostly affect communities of color. It's not just communities of color, of course. It's mostly that. So we have a for-profit mindset that still commodifies those said racist tendencies. So, for example, so like I said, like with environmental racism, also with disproportionate amount of black men that are incarcerated between the virulent attacks on black families. We talk about the men separated from women and children, and you start to talk about those type of attacks on family units. You talk about who that benefits economically. It does protect elites.
So again,
because of
sorry,
well, it goes deeper to just our history. It goes as an effort to squash radical voices that would even dare challenge the established order.
Would that be? But again, what I'm trying to ascertain is why that would be any different if we did not have capitalism, instead had socialism instead, for example. Why would the socialistic order not try to protect itself by squashing dissent?
That's really the reason you have to get rid of the state.
Okay.
That's the reason you have to get rid of the state.
Well, if you get rid of the state, then how would you prevent larger communities from stepping on smaller? Like, let's say we get rid of the state. What's stopping white nationalists from just like eradicating black people?
What would stop them?
Yep.
That's why there has to be preparation before that. It wouldn't just be this magical thing, like I said. So inherently the idea would be we would, as black people, have our own self-defense militias in our own communities.
As black people, or just like in areas that happen to be black?
Both.
So you would have black people specific defense militias.
It can be black specific, it can be mixed colors, it can be whatever. But like I said,
Okay.
I'm not making it about it being separatist. I'm talking about it through the black lens. I'm not trying to make it separatist. I'm not trying to make it about separating
Sure,
races.
sure.
It's
I'm
just
just
about, it's just about, focus. The ultimate focus is on class, but I'm just talking through a black lens, through mostly a black lens, because we don't really talk about these things through a black lens.
how would a lack of state prevent interpersonal racism and racism in the workplace?
It probably might not, but it would go a hell of a long way to easing it and eliminating it with time.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that idea because, like, for instance, um, legal protections and having the judiciary be able to prevent things like redlining, like we recently saw. I think it was like 8 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe somewhere around there. There was a large case where a multi-million-dollar redlining scheme was exposed out of a corporation, and they were sued in a civil suit, and the people won. So, like, that is a good example of the state using its authority and its power to be able to force a corporation to pay out, to be able to get people their money on the basis of racial discrimination. Like, that wouldn't exist without a state, right? You couldn't even take somebody to court.
Yeah, but you're challenging everything. You're not just challenging government. You're challenging government, corporations, everybody. Everybody who benefits from the current capitalist order. So you'd have to challenge everybody. Because if you kept everything, if you only challenge government, you kept the corporations the way that they are. Like I said, that scenario is possible.
Well, that scenario is possible even without capitalism, because this corporation, um, might have seen significant profits from doing this, right? Because by keeping certain people that people view as undesirable out of a specific neighborhood, they can keep the prices of that specific neighborhood where they want it to be, right?
You're talking about in terms of inflating costs and housing.
Yep. Unfortunately, a part of redlining is the idea that a lot of people don't like living around brown people. So what they
Yeah.
do is they prevent brown people from moving into a specific area to keep the housing prices in a good state.
Yeah.
So they made money off of it. I see no reason why that wouldn't also be the case. Like, I find no compelling reason is given for why a socially run business wouldn't do what is inside of their financial interest, because they are a business after all, and they all make money off of it. I see no reason why they wouldn't do it.
Are you still keeping the business the same structure that you did in the capitalist system?
No, because there is a democratic ownership of that business. So now just more people profit. That's it.
But then in a way, you're still keeping the same framework then.
So how would
Okay,
you?
So
Let me
keep-
let me interject here because there's a couple things. First of all, do we mind if we add a third to this discussion? President Sunday wants to come back you up, 𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. And second of all, thank you for the raid. Red talks about stuff. Really appreciate you. Hit that like button, hit that follow button, hit that subscribe button. Okay. But yes, so what structure would you have in place in a non-capitalist system for companies, businesses, corporations, whatever, what have you, that would prevent or at least mitigate these the exploitation that happens under capitalism?
In that they are simply, you have to remember, you have to keep these structures in terms of power. We're not talking about we're not talking about some CEO strongman at the top. We're talking about keeping those horizontal structures in place and then having that sort of democratic relationship with the communities themselves. So, like I stated before, it's literally people, community controlling things in their community. So, the corporation responds to the community. The mandate is not just profit anymore. The mandate is whatever the community needs. Bottom line, in the story. It's not about this it's not about solely the maximization of a few people's paychecks. So if the community needs something and the corporation, or whatever company structure or whatever the company is, that's still horizontally ran and it is directly in the community control of the people, what ends up happening is that purpose is now changed to benefiting the community. So anything it does for the greater good of the community. Now, are workers still paid? Yes. If you still keep a company like that, yeah. The difference is, though, is that in terms of who's responsible, the people are in control of that. The people have to have some say so and interact with the company. It can't just be this monolithic thing that exists and that doesn't respond to where it's located.
So this is kind of what I was referring to before, is what you're talking about is changing a structure, changing the for-profit structure away from a for-profit instead of a community-focused structure is what you're looking for. I don't think this is real. It's actually ultimately the reason why I stopped being a socialist. I actually used to be a socialist. Ultimately, I just believe that when you have people inside of these businesses, they're going to act in their own financial interest. We see it time and time again, universally, right? I don't think these capital owners are a unique group of people that are like so incredibly demonic and whatever. I think just at the end of the day, people will turn a blind eye to what gets another zero on their paycheck. And so I think running with that interpretation of the world, it's better to just assume that they're going to do this and work with what I can to be able to benefit the people that are harmed the most by whatever system I'm in. So I would just appeal to the idea. I don't think you can do anything to be able to just make people in the business just like their community and just do self-sacrifice for their community in mass. You could probably find groups of people who can do it, but like to structure your whole system off of altruism, perpetual altruism of your people, seems like a losing strategy. And it seems like people have bet on it before and it's resulted in chaos. And I'm not referring to like the USSR and things like that. I'm even referring to like capitalist structures of people assuming, or even non-capitalist structures like dictatorships or whatever the fuck, leaders. So they're assuming perpetual altruism and it never works out. So yeah.
Okay. Give us a second, gang. President Sunday, I'll be here in a minute. And FD Signifier might be joining us at 8. Expressed interest in.
Okay.
That might happen. But until then, I guess my issue with you, Irrelevant, and let's talk about this, is I think that, like, the reason, because you're right, under a capitalist system, I think that's how people behave. And if they could take a 10%, 20%, 30% raise to get that new car, to get that better house, to get that better schooling, they absolutely would, and they would have no problem exploiting their neighbor to do so. I don't see I don't see any problem with that. But what I wonder is how much of that behavior is learned because of the system with which we grow up, right? With which we are raised in, with which we exist in, where of course we would do these things. Of course we would exploit these neighbors, because in order doing so gives us such a huge value of life increase that we would be fools not to. But in a system where that was not the case, where we did not receive so many bonuses or boons for exploiting others, and in fact the people being exploited also had a say equal to ours in what was going on, I wonder if we wouldn't naturally just see a decrease in that type of behavior, simply because we have different incentive structures, right?
It's absolutely possible, and I want to state that the idea that if we changed our economic system, it wouldn't potentially dramatically influence our social understanding of each other. It absolutely could massively influence our social understanding of each other. But number one, something that again I really think is a losing strategy is betting on people's altruism. I think again, history has shown this to be one of the worst things you can do. Betting on people's altruism for significant portions of state control or your system of governance seems to always be a losing strategy. But even beyond that, right, I would state that in a socialist structure, it can also incentivize toxic behavior, because right now, as it stands, the amount of money that interpersonally we stand to gain as a result of perpetuating racist ideas and stereotypes is pretty much just like clout or interpersonal stuff like that. Maybe if you're politically oriented, you're running like some kind of political campaign or something like that, you stand to gain money. But for the most part, it's not financial. And with a socialist system, you could have millions of people benefiting financially off of a racist structure. So it could actually perpetuate racism and solidify it, because everybody has an incentive now financially to do it.
Speaking of financially incentives to do things, Sunday, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
So you've been watching this for a bit. I do want to give our friend 𝕾𝖍 here a chance to respond to that. I want to hear his thoughts. But
It's been a couple of minutes since I have been listening in. I was listening in back when I first messaged you to bring me on. So I'll let you guys play it out a little bit more. And yeah.
But go ahead, 𝕾𝖍. What do you think of that response? Under socialism, or under a kind of a stateless socialistic system where, again, democratically owned corporations, democratically owned workplaces, they simply wouldn't just... we can hear your crackling, Sunday, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That we wouldn't simply see people just willing to sell out and exploit their neighbor for gain, especially if that neighbor happens to be a minority of the population, and disliked in general.
I mean, that's what I'm talking about. And really, when I'm talking about sort of a stateless socialism type thing, I'm talking about the importance of rebuilding those social bonds and building up community again. Having real sense of community, not this text back and forth, not the whole internet nonsense back and forth, but actually like a sense of interpersonal connectivity. So that's the reason that has to be first. Now keep in mind, everything I'm saying is not going to happen instantaneously. So that's why it's important to build those social bonds so no one is alienated. So
I don't want to break the flow, but I am curious. Can somebody sort of recap where we're at in the conversation exactly?
I could try.
Go ahead.
So right now we're trying to figure out exactly why capitalism, as in comparison to different modes of economics systems, are going to perpetuate racism inherently. Meaning that what about capitalism is inherently racist and will not allow for a racially equal society. So
That's
it's just
interesting.
like,
And you and your
why?
thesis is that it is inherently racist.
Not mine. No.
Ewan, or 𝕬𝖎. Sorry, I don't know why I was calling you Ewan. 𝕬𝖎. Is that how you say your name?
Yeah, E-Wade, E-W-A-D. Yeah.
𝕬𝖎. My apologies.
Like D-Wade,
Um,
like Dwayne Wade.
okay. So your thesis is that capitalism is inherently racist.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're talking capitalism even considered as an abstraction. So, for example, if you were to set up a capitalist system on the moon, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right, as you were. Thank you.
So yeah, like I was just saying, really when I'm talking about community control of things, it involves building those social bonds. It involves reconnecting. This is going to take time. I know it's going to take time.
So I would say if racism is alleviated in any economic system we choose as a result of going through the processes that you're talking about, building that social community connection and things like that, I would say it was alleviated because of making those social community connections, not because of the change out from capitalism to a separate economic system. Right. I think that what you're describing actually is part of the way that we prevent interpersonal racism and racism when it comes to our economic system, which is again exposure to a group of people, also finding common ground amongst a group of people, and common ground can look like class, however it might be, right? Um, and I think finding that with the people around you is going to be way more likely to alleviate any issues of racism than removing or changing the economic system.
Can I possibly help Ewade out here a little bit? Because I think,
Yeah.
That's why you're here.
um, yeah, I
Yeah, go ahead,
think
jump
judging
in.
from, fair enough. I think judging from what I'm hearing, I understand, I think where Ewade's coming from, but I'm not, I'm seeing like a critical part of the argument that's not really being furnished here. Um, Relly, do I call you Relly or what do I call you?
Sure, you can call me
Okay,
that.
Relly. Uh, I think this is the first time speaking, by the way. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it is
Um,
nice to meet you.
when we're talking about how, for example, solidarity within a class can overcome racial divides, that may be true under certain circumstances, but I think there's sort of an additional layer to this that gives rise to class divisions as well as racial divisions in an identical fashion. So, if you're, for example, let's go full Marxian here. If you're somebody who owns the means of production, you're not somebody who has to labor in order to make a wage in order to live. Your relationship to capitalism is going to be radically different than somebody who has to work in order to live. Why? Because within a capitalist market system, um, your uh, your wage is hypothetically the uh, return on you selling your labor, right?
Hmm.
Um, a capitalist does not have to sell their labor. Therefore, you end up with a situation of de facto exploitation. Why? Because you have people whose social existence is determined by their capacity to commodify themselves. They become a part of the exchange as well. And one of the things that racial divisions does is it provides a very useful alibi for getting that at a premium at some level. And so I think I disagree. I'm going to disagree with Ewade's thesis that it's inherently racist simply because we can imagine an identical system formally taking place in a situation without racial divisions at all. We can imagine it taking place in a situation that's totally racially homogenous, in which case it would be a little bit absurd to say that the system is therefore racist. But it seems to me like it furnishes us with not the only one historically that we've had. We've had other excuses for exploiting other groups of people, but it furnishes us with one of the most effective and potent ones for doing so along very strong economic lines. It gives us a framework to allow racism to seep in at a very deep structural level to how we live as communities. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me.
That's personally how I would have gone about this line of the argumentation. I don't want to usurp you there, 𝕬𝖎. I haven't heard everything you had to say.
I guess
No,
to back
no,
up
you're
the,
good.
if I may, to back up the inherently racist, however, part of it is one of the thing about markets specifically, is it's always going to favor the majority. So if you have a country like we do in America where we have 70-60% are part of the in-group, and then you have various out-groups, right? People of color, indigenous people, etc. They tend to have different economic needs. And what I mean by that is they value different things in the market. But because markets will always go towards the majority, it's just inherently going to make it harder and less capable for the minority, whatever they want, whatever they happen to need, to get what they want and they need. There's going to be less infrastructure dedicated towards it. There's going to be less of everything, less advertisement, etc. Capitalism, by its very nature, and these markets, by their very nature, are going to propagate the hegemony, right? Propagate the whatever structure happens to be in power. And again, that has historically tended to be along racial lines, at least in America. And so it has kind of gotten us stuck. So while it might not have caused racism, it makes it harder and harder to get away from racism. Does that make sense?
What do you mean when you say it favors markets favor the majority? Can you
So
elaborate
what
on
I
that?
mean by that is, so say you have a large group, a city, millions of people, and most of the people in that city, right? They enjoy, I don't know, soda. They like Coke. Coke's, they love Coke. Okay. Coke should be cheap. Coke should be plentiful. The market will be saturated with Coke. But if you have a minority group in there who, for whatever reason, does not like Coke and instead likes another drink or another product, they are not going to be able to have these things. And when we talk about culture and how that relates to race, obviously there are different things that along cultural and ethnic lines.
I see what you're saying.
Does
So
that make
if I can put
sense?
this,
Yeah.
well, if I could, maybe you can clarify it for me. I'll put it into my own words. So what you're saying is, given our propensity under capitalism to let sort of market logic determine how we make decisions, there is going to be an overwhelming tendency for smaller and smaller groups to be essentially held in contempt and neglected in decision-making processes. And we see this a lot.
Absolutely.
For example, we have a mutual friend, incidentally, who applies the same logic in politics, where we have, for example, open contempt for non-binary identities, et cetera, because they're just too weird to sell as part of a populist political platform, so the logic goes. Things of that sort. That's sort of where you're going with this?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Again, I'm not
yeah.
of that opinion, but I'm trying to steelman it as best as.
Oh, you're not of that opinion. What opinion are you of?
Well, I don't believe capitalism is inherently racist. I think it's a very anti-racist tool. I think that the only color that capitalism cares about at the end of the day is green. It's money. And if you have money, regardless if you're black, white, Asian, whatever, you will succeed in the system in a way that you probably couldn't under a more democratic system, simply because you don't have to rely on your peers. Okay?
But surely, if I may,
What is the
I'm
opportunity
Wick,
cost?
not Shirley. But go ahead, 𝕬𝖎. I want to hear from 𝕬𝖎.
What is the opportunity cost of that success, though?
There certainly are some, right? It tends to be on the backs of others, but that's not necessarily on racial lines.
It ends up playing out a lot of times that way. It's not solely on racial lines, but it ends up playing out that way.
I disagree. I mean, historically, yes, but I think that capitalism has been a tool that has allowed people of color, especially, right, to move on up, to break out of the communities that they're in, of the red lines that they've been placed in. If you have enough money, racism hits you a lot less hard in a capitalism system. Yeah, it'll still be an effect on you, but you don't have to worry about the effects of racism if you have money as much as you would if you were poor. Now, under
Well,
a more democratic system, right, I don't think you would be able to. I don't think the individual would be as empowered to get away from these systems as they are under capitalism. I think the empowerment of the individual that happens under capitalism is absolutely one of the biggest ways for people to escape from their racist surroundings.
So
What about the inherent instability inside of capitalism itself?
Inherent
Crashes
instability.
on average every 4 to 7 years.
I
don't think that's inherent to capitalism though. Like capitalism persists besides that. What you're talking about are I guess contradictions and unfortunate sort of dynamics of finance at a certain level. That's not really an argument against capitalism per se. Capitalism survived these just fine.
You wanted to say something irrelevant?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, me. I was curious of what President Sunday wanted to get in there at the same time you wait. I was curious.
Go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. So Wick, I think I would concede pretty readily that any sort of system that doesn't specifically register race as a component of its constitution, taken formally, you can imagine situations in which just by adhering formally to the system and ignoring racial characteristics or racial groups, you would have a necessarily non-racist system sort of necessity. That was redundant, but you get the idea. However, I want to bring us back again to like the specific nature of capitalism in particular, the specific class relations that it sort of presumes structurally. And it does presume them structurally because there's going to be a class of people that doesn't have to sell their labor, and there's going to be a class of people that does. And as a consequence of having to sell their labor and that labor becoming a commodity that's exchanged with other things, that class now becomes sort of a fungible mass, right? When we talk about, for example, how much work goes into the production of some item, we don't specify how much of polishing, how much of screwing, how much of this is all very unfortunate language, but I get to the point. We have a class of people that is treated essentially as an element, as kind of a standing reserve that you draw from like a resource, and we have a class of people who aren't. And one of the worries I would have is that historically, if we're coming out of a situation in which we have a proliferation of land grabs across the globe by people who identify according to specific racial characteristics, these class divides are going to correspond to other things besides just who in the abstract happens to own land and who doesn't. The people who own land are going to be of a certain set of characteristics. The people who don't are going to be of a certain set of characteristics. And that's going to drive racial divides, if they exist in a given situation, deep into the economic constitution of a society or of a system. And so this is why, like, I sort of agree with you in principle. Like, I understand where you're going with the idea that a formal system that doesn't register race, it's not necessarily racist in and of itself. However, when we're talking about capitalism, we're not just talking about a formal system. We're talking about something that's emergent within a racial system, within and on top
but
of
the question
racial
would
systems.
become, right? Is it more
Yes.
or less racist than any other system that would have emerged? And I think what mechanisms within that economic system would
I would say so.
help
I would say
or
so,
hurt
and I'll
racism?
well, I would say so, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because taken as a merely formal structure, once again, if it doesn't register race, and the concept of race is not very old as we understand today, given that any formal system, if it doesn't register race, would not be racist, it having an inbuilt class exploitation element to it that provides the perfect slot for race as a one of the characterizing features of people who end up in here as opposed to here, I would say that it makes it certainly tend more towards entrenching racism than potentially any other system.
You want to respond to that, Irrelevant, or should I?
Yeah, sure. I feel like
barring offshoots afterwards, like I'm not going to argue that capitalism is more racist than some construction of a modern fascist or something.
Okay. So the so an issue that I had was kind of some of the statements before about how there is a certain class of people who's seen as a resource, and there's certain classes
Mhm.
of people who are not. Even capital owners are literally a resource. That is what they are. They're a resource. They have a pool of money that is quite literally used daily as a resource to be able to perpetuate the operations and
We can
ongoings
we can
of the corporation.
yeah, if I
Well,
can, do
well
you mind if I jump in right there? I don't mean to
Can
cut you
I?
off, but
did you
yeah,
get
please.
no irrelevant? I don't think
I,
irrelevant even got
I
his
did.
point
Yeah,
out.
I did want. Yeah, I wanted to
Connect the
go.
dots first before.
Yeah. So with that, um, the second portion was the idea that this class specific orientation of the economic system is going to lean more heavily into perpetuating racism. I'm not sure. Again, I agree with this idea on the basis of things that I was saying to 𝕬𝖍𝖎, because if we agree with the idea that there's certain um, economic advantages to exploiting racism, whether it be inside of media or what have you, then what we would be doing is, instead of having those exploits and those gains be given to a small group of people, they would now be given to a wider group of people. So now there's everyday Americans who are benefiting off of racism, not only potentially, if you agree with the idea that there's a lot of Americans who benefit off of racism interpersonally, now financially they benefit off of racism. So I really don't see any tangible argument that these individuals would have a massive desire to change
Okay.
the system.
Hold that thought on the second one, because I'm probably going to need you to recapitulate it in a second. But for the first one, in terms of owners also being a resource, true, we can very easily conceive of owners themselves, for example, being a flow or a channeling of material that we can characterize as resources. But what I'm specifically talking about is vis-a-vis the market. When we are talking about how things are exchanged in a capitalist system, the labor of a worker is what is traded. And so the worker, the laborer, becomes fungible with other people. The owner doesn't. The owner as an individual is an actor who owns resources that go beyond his person, beyond their capacity to sort of sell their time and their body's work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you end up in a situation once again where, yeah, it's true. The entire world is comprised of all the same energy that comes from the sun. But when we're talking about human relations under a capitalist system, we're talking specifically about a system in which labor is traded. And so if you don't need to trade your labor, there's a divide there. It's an insurmountable one, because you're fundamentally just not of a kind in terms of your behavior and how you live from those other people, and you have a level of power over that that those other people don't have. Because if you have to trade your labor, you have to trade your labor, right? Your existence and your well-being, et cetera, is conditioned on an action that it's simply not for those other people, and those other people own the things that facilitate you trading your labor, et cetera. Can you let me know if that gave you any problems, and can you restate the second one, because that was a little bit long and I didn't entirely follow it.
Okay, so when you say, did that give me any problems, are you asking for a response to that, or are you asking if
I'm
I
just
understood you?
I didn't want to brush over if you had any issue with what I was saying.
Okay, so my, I guess, issue with it is the idea that one, typically when we're viewing money, we're viewing it as in an exchange of labor that has happened in the past, right? That is supposed to be the idea. And I agree that in general, like especially with modern ways that capitalism is
Do you money that way?
practiced, it's not perfect. It's, sorry, what I'm trying to say is that
Yeah.
money is the physical embodiment of labor being exchanged in the past. That's what money is supposed to be, in theory. Is it's supposed to be, this is an extension of what your labor has provided. Use it to be able to exchange for other labor. That's what it's supposed to be. So when, for instance, as an example, let's say we both get paid $10,000 a year or something like that, incredibly low amount of money, doesn't really matter. Our expenses are roughly $5,000.
I'm on YouTube. That's probably not too far off. Continue.
Yeah, hey, listen, hey, we all are struggling out here. $5,000 a month, let's say, or $5,000 a year for expenses, but then let's say I'm really bad at spending my money on top of that, so I like waste a bunch of it or whatever, but you keep saving, and then you get to the point where, yeah, yada yada, you get to the
Sure.
point where you accumulate a bunch of money, and then you're able to spend it in a different place. That is supposed to be ideally how money works. So when we're talking about these people, this class of people that are capable of doing that and putting significant amounts of money up front to be able to own portions of businesses, we are talking about people that, in theory, again, got this as a result of taking their labor in the past and
Right.
applying it to something currently. Not only that, but also another response that I have to that is actually a fair chunk of everyday ordinary people actually do own some means of
Mhm.
or some shares in companies. This is very common in retirement funds and things like that. So a lot of everyday people actually do own shares and stake in company. They are shareholders, similar to, they just not on the scale of other people. And
Well, sure, but I
usually,
mean, like, fundamentally, if at the end of the day they still have to sell their labor, it's kind of a moot distinction because their existence is still predicated on that. But I hear what you're saying. So if
And
I'm
also, I
I'm
just want
I'm
to make sure I understand the back and forth. But
I'll shut up after this.
You wait if you want to get in. Just
Yeah,
don't. You're new here, so what I'm
just
saying is,
push,
yeah, just elbow
just
your
push.
way
You
in.
gotta. Yeah,
Oh,
this is
okay. I was just listening, just letting it go, just
this
letting
is
it go by.
If you
Just
have,
waiting for-
but this is how this works. If you have a point, elbow your way in here. Just get in there,
Okay.
right? Okay.
Okay.
WhickTV is a land of lawlessness and depravity.
Okay.
If I hear you correctly, um, the essence of your retort is uh, capitalism as such doesn't actually bar people of different racial designations, even if, for example, of racial designations that have historically in the territory we're talking about or wherever have been kept out at some point in the past. They are still able to buy property. They are still able to. There's social mobility upwards is still a possibility. They can even own the means of productions after a certain level, after a certain time. Fair enough. I don't disagree with that whatsoever. Once again, like any formal system that doesn't register race, provides uh, if it provides avenues equally to everybody, then the formal system itself is not intrinsically racist. But if we're talking about a system that is in history, if we're talking about the real thing itself, and not sort of like a map of it sort of drawn in the abstract that ignores the details of how it comes to be, if it takes place in a situation in which race is practically registered as a condition of wealth or a condition of access, and it wasn't that long ago that it was in very formal terms, segregation went on to the middle point of the last century, then you will see correlations, very, very strong correlations between class and race in a way that would not be so easily facilitated by a different system. Now, prejudice can still have similar outcomes in terms of like disparate health, wealth, etc. But capitalism formally provides the easiest way to insert that in a formal sense or in a de facto sense as a strict part of its overall structure, precisely because there is that direct relationship between your place in the capitalist system and your financial independence or your economic independence.
okay,
Yeah,
as opposed to what system though? Like, so
as
for
opposed to what
instance,
system?
yeah, like what system are you referring to that would not have these same problems, and why?
Formally, I think any system might not have these same problems, including capitalism. Incidentally, the issue we have is not that capitalism as a system is intrinsically racist. I do disagree with the thesis of the panel to that extent. However, capitalism as it has emerged historically is intrinsically racist insofar as it has emerged alongside racist systems and therefore has basically opened its mouth to the racist influence of the places in which it has taken place, simply because, once again, if you have people separated economically along racial grounds as a result of specifically racial prejudice, that's going to correspond to people who are in a situation of economic dependency upon the capitalist system versus people who are solely beneficiaries of it.
Um,
Once again,
maybe we
like
could,
not necessary, not necessary.
yeah,
We could imagine a
but
situation in which that is purely rectified. Yeah.
maybe we can break bread on this idea then. Um, if I were to agree with some of the things that you said, would you agree with the idea that if we were in a socialist system, right now there would still be significant amounts of racism?
In a socialist system, depends on what
Correct.
you mean by that. Potentially, yeah. Unless you actually break down the racial structures and conceptions, like even the notion, for example, of races being self-contained units that have to be treated as independent entities. Well, that's gonna maintain a racist, at the very least, a racist overlay to whatever system you're deploying.
Sure. So if we agree with at least that, so then I guess if you agree with that idea, if you had a similar situation as what you described as possibly not being a racist system that socialism could inhabit, if a capitalist system embodied those same concepts, would it be racist as well, or would it
If a
not be racist?
if a capitalist system existed in a situation in which the very concept of race
Yes.
and the I guess the concreteness in our imaginations of race as an entity, if that was gone,
Yeah.
of course, yeah. That's why I was asking Ewade if he would consider it to be intrinsically racist if it was
Oh,
on
okay.
those. Yeah.
So then, yeah, then it sounds like we probably agree that there's certain underlying problems that are upstream from the economic issues that causes racial disparity inside of whatever system it is. And now we could speak maybe to the effects of racism as a result of the economic system, but I think ultimately the solutions for racism as it exists are things that are independent of the economic system.
Well, on the subject of fixing the system, this is where we need to be really careful between when we're talking about capitalism as the formal concept, like we've drawn out what are the bare conceptual necessities that we need to exist for us to have a capitalist system, and can we imagine that without race? Of course we can. And capitalism as it lives in the world. Because capitalism as it lives in the world, by receiving race as an input into who ends up in what class, that's going to reinforce itself as well. Now, as you aptly pointed out, there will, in cases, for actually far fewer people than you might expect, but at the very least within, for example, certain democratic states like the U.S., there will be opportunity for a lot of people who otherwise would have been in those lower classes to move up over time, especially as these states liberalize and expand political rights and so on and so forth. But within capitalism as a whole, it's still going to rely upon that at the global level. The distant manufacture, for example, is horrific, and there is no upward mobility for a child sweatshop worker who's supplying the Walmart clothing that I'm wearing right now. So you're correct, but the system as a whole, while it admits of mobility within it for some, it relies upon the distinction of one who owns and one who sells themselves, essentially. And you can't really get out of that. This is one of the reasons why, if, for example, you actually read Marx, socialism is not a different system opposed to capitalism, although there are socialist elements you can impose within liberal state systems and so on and so forth. It's a thing that takes place as a consequence of capitalism later on. Yeah. Wick, you look like you're in distress.
$5 from Shapingro Steam Tech to ask, I want to understand Sunday's position, which rests on worker versus capital owner. Is someone who plays poker for work a worker or a capital owner?
Someone who plays poker for work? Do they have to play poker for work?
They have to make money to eat, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, okay. So the difference is not whether or not somebody does things in their lives. Elon Musk can choose at any moment of his life to go work in the mines. He can do that. That's a thing he can do. Billionaires can choose to go to work like Ayn Rand protagonists and go work on the railways. What fundamentally distinguishes people of a worker class or a laboring class or whatever you like and people who own capital is that the people who own capital can generate income off of that itself. The people who labor have to sell their labor as a condition of their existence. And because of how we value commodities Because what's the value? Here's something really basic. How many cans of beer is this cup worth? Well, if this cup is worth 2 cans of beer, let's say, the reciprocal of this is this 2 cans of beer is worth 1 cup. That's the value of it. So what actually anchors that? Well, it's going to be at some abstract general level, how much quote unquote labor is required to generate these things. And so because labor has been turned into an abstract value that way, and because labor is what a worker sells and what defines the worker is turned into an abstract resource. The capitalist is the person in this system. The capitalist decides, facilitates, makes decisions, and does so not out of necessity, not out of like life and death necessity. Elon Musk can stop working. He can stop tweeting. God, it would probably expand his life if he did. He can stop doing anything. You, me, we can't. We don't have a choice. That's the distinguishing feature.
I wanna give 𝕍𝖎 a chance to get in here. Been quiet for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to monopolize this.
No, you're all good.
Shouldn't have shaken this beer. That was dumb.
You want me to get in on that question, or
What your current thoughts on the whole situation, please?
really just made in terms of like the point was made in terms of capital and labor. I mean, like I said, you have those with capital that can make money off the capital, and those who have to work. So with that, you have you have people living different realities, yet living in the same general country. So I guess where I don't know where I'm going with that there.
I don't know either.
So-
Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that.
I guess
So-
I'd ask, if I may. So this idea of the labor theory of value that you're going on, I'm not sure if I buy it, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So the labor theory of value, as you said, stated like two beers, 1 mug. How much labor does it take to produce each? And that's kind of where we get with the value and things like that. That's not how markets tend to work. I don't care how much labor it takes to produce what I want.
See, I know your error right away.
What's my well? You haven't even heard my
No, but
statement.
I know exactly where you're going because I've heard this a million times before. No
For
offense
the
to you,
times,
smart,
fair
very,
enough.
very smart people have made this mistake. When Marx is talking about value, he's not talking about what people set as a price or what the market is willing to bear. A better way to look at it is what sets the minimum viable price for a thing from the vantage point of a vendor. Because if the labor required exceeds in cost the funds you are getting in exchange for that, then that's going to anchor it. There will be a point, a price
Certainly.
that you set
I
that
agree.
will.
There's a floor. There's a floor,
Yeah.
or maybe you want to call it a ceiling. I don't know how you want to look at it, whether it's floor or ceiling. But there is a point where if irrelevant, I see you. Give me a minute,
Yes,
and I'll let
okay.
you in. Okay. But I understand that cost, if it costs more to produce it than it does that you can get from it from other sources, then absolutely, it's going to affect how much you can bear it. Now, this is taking out government subsidies and other things like that, which we see in play in things like airlines. Is a subsidy.
Well, yeah, but that wouldn't be the market determining the.
That's an
No,
aside.
sure, but that wouldn't be the market
But
determining the
the
value
problem
thing. That would
is-
be a conscious
But
interjection.
the problem is,
Go on, sorry.
is that that's only the floor, because how high this price can go is not tied to the labor it is required to produce it. So
Well,
this
it
could
is a
be
little
much
bit because
far,
within the market.
far more. This could be
No,
worth
no,
far
hang on.
more. It could cost pennies to
Sure,
produce,
sure, but-
and I can make
but-
literally thousands of
Yeah.
dollars off of it. Right?
But Wick, there is competition in a market, and so therefore, if you are charging vastly in excess of what somebody else can charge, then they will charge less and they will take away your business. And so, what Marx's labor theory of value dictates is not where prices land; it dictates what is the range of viable prices? And it doesn't determine it absolutely. In the world, there are going to be so many different exigencies that change what the actual prices are in the market. The fundamental point of all of this is not even to really determine what the prices of objects are, as if ultimately that's what we care about. The point of interest is that by dint of the value of labor being intrinsically defined by its relation to the production of commodities which are fungible with it, labor becomes fungible as well. Labor becomes a commodity. The point is that human labor itself becomes commodified. That's the point of interest. It becomes a thing that is sold on the marketplace,
I wanna toss
which
it.
defines... Go on, please.
I want to toss it to irrelevant because, but
Okay.
once you're done,
Coward.
I was dying. Okay.
I know.
Labor has absolutely nothing to do even with the value range of a given product. And the
course it
reason
does.
why, and here, well, let me tell you the reason why.
Okay.
The reason why is because we're talking about an investment in an idea of that value. So let's say something cost me $2 million to make, right?
Yeah.
I can give it away for absolutely free, even though the labor cost is so vastly. I can pay people to be able to have this product. We've seen it happen with celebrities where they get like cars and they're paid to have
Sure,
this
yeah.
vehicle so that way they can drive it around. The range has nothing to do with the labor. We're not going to go, oh, well, it's $2 million. So like this range is clearly incapable. It's what do I think?
What you're
Hold on.
talking about, though, is
Let
not
him.
things being
You
put up
gotta.
on the
You gotta
market.
let him finish.
Hold on.
Let him
It's
finish.
what do I think I'm going to get as a result of offering this product to this person at this specific whatever it is. Okay, let's say I have something that costs 1 penny
Yeah.
to produce, right, as a result of the labor, right? I can offer it, I can give it to somebody for $100 million, absolutely, if I believe that's going to net me $101 million in returns. It's all
Yeah,
about what do
course.
I believe, but that's ultimately the idea that value is based on what I perceive other people as willing to exchange
No.
for
I
it.
don't disagree with you at all. But what you're talking about is not commodity exchange. What you're talking about is people actually not engaging in capitalism because they foresee an additional benefit down the line, like in advertising.
No,
or
that
something
is
like
capitalism. How's that not
No,
capitalism?
no. Well, it's not capitalism because it's not concerned with the exchange of labor as a commodity on the market. That's sort of what defines capitalism. You sell your labor in order to make a living, which you can then exchange for commodities, which have become fungible with labor as a result.
So wait, in your mind, after there has been an exchange between the laborers and the individuals who pay the laborers, it's no longer about capitalism.
I'm
Or
sorry.
I'm confused why you're
No,
saying
no.
that the
No, because what you're describing is not a market exchange. What you're describing is somebody giving away their possessions because they see a social benefit or an advertising benefit or something else
yes,
down the line.
but that is a market
But
benefit. It's
that's
advertising.
it pertains to the market, but it isn't
Yes.
the market. And we're talking about the market under capitalism. We are talking about commodity exchange specifically. That's actually a crucial element of it. Hi, FD Signifier.
Hello. I agree that commodity exchange is a significant part of the market, but the idea that advertising and
But
crucially
though, it defines
You gotta let him. You gotta let
the
him
market
finish,
under
buddy.
capitalism. Yes.
So advertising is and this was actually very common. There was a lot of interesting things going on in, I believe, the 50s and 60s that are regarding exactly what you're referring to. And it actually addressed one of the points where you were talking about how, hey, Wick, if you offer to sell your Coke at $1,000, somebody's going to undercut your price and then you're going to be priced out of the market. That's not true. We see multiple
but if I may, very quickly, you're making so many errors, and I just want to save you from yourself.
Sure.
As a good socialist, that is what I do. You're right. Everything you're saying is true. People can do that. People can defy, for example, what will, on average, be the. You can think of it like mechanically, like if.
I thought you said very quickly, Sunday.
Well, very quickly for me. Look, you can defy at a loss, okay, market dynamics. What pressures you to put something at a certain price? What makes that a risk, however, what makes it a risk to give away the product is precisely the fact that you had to expend a certain amount of labor to produce it in the first place. And there will be a range between you selling it for this. That's not a risk. This gives you a profit. You sell it too much, other people will undercut you because they'll make it for cheaper. That still exists, even if it's never honored. That's what the labor theory of value is concerned with. It's not concerned with what people in the world actually sell for, if they sell for at all. Like, obviously, Marx wasn't stupid. He knew that people could, for example, sell lower than the value of an object, or sell like unviably higher than the value of an object, so high that nobody pays for it, or only a crazy person pays for it.
Okay,
Right?
so
Yeah.
if what you're referring to then is that there is, when you're talking about the labor theory of value, only that there is a concept of which is returns on investment, then sure. But
Well,
but
no,
that's
because
what
it's not returns on investment. This is very critical. The point of the labor theory of value is not to determine the individual prices of specific objects in the world. The point of the labor theory of value is to account for what connects the amount of labor sold by a worker, what anchors that, to the amount of commodities it can buy.
Okay, we
right?
have gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, and I want to kind of pull it back to the topic at hand if we can, which is how do these systems, how does this labor theory of value, if you want to call it that, relate to racism and relate to the structures that uphold racism? We're joined by our esteemed colleague here, FD Signifier. Hello.
Esteemed colleague.
Indeed.
Oh, that's a warmer welcome than I maybe even deserve on
It's
this
not a
side
compliment, it's Wick.
of the town.
I'm sorry.
I'm just popping in. I was watching earlier, and there's a couple things that I wanted to just chime in on, and then I won't just come in and give a speech and leave, of course. But one thing that I think bothered me by the argument was I personally don't believe socialism is some magical bean that will solve racism. I want to be very clear on that. Socialism historically has a mixed results in that regard. Many of the biggest voices in the not biggest voices, excuse me, many of the bearded men have some sketchy histories with racism, and let alone like sexism. Like that is just that's why intersectionality became a thing. It was because like, look, you guys are doing a good job of analyzing these labor issues and work issues and money issues, but also you're still racist and sexist. So we're gonna like add this wrinkle to the equation. And one of the reasons that intersectionality was useful was because it's clear historically, at least in America, and I won't get too big from our britches and talk about places outside of my actual expertise, that racism was a fundamental feature of capitalism in America. So much so that pretty much all of the major figures in the civil rights movement were left of sockdems, right? With Martin Luther King probably being the most centrist lying, and that was mostly on a religious basis at the time. And then if you look at just the history of active socialist movements in America, like people that really got busy on the topic, it's basically white academics and the black working class, mixing that a little bit with like the Panthers, right? So the reason for that is because the thing that I think was missing from the conversation, at least that I saw, was the fact that capitalism requires surplus labor. Capitalism requires pretty much a permanent underclass. And here in America, that has been designated to black people. This is to put it simply. And and there will be no way to unleash black people from that position with capitalism still in place, because capitalism is going to constantly find ways to reinforce that positionality for black people. Before anybody responds, I do want to say, irrelevant, I want to talk to you in the future about being an incel, if that's okay with you. I actually left a comment a long time ago. And so I don't know when, because
really?
I planned videos. Yeah, I don't know when it was. It's one of your incel videos. You were talking to somebody, and I was like, "Oh shit, this dude's an incel," and like and I started getting ideas. Well, a former incel, correct? I don't want to do
Yeah, yeah. At this point, it was kind of a joke, but I can't say that it was a joke because I said it so much. So I'll kind of own the fact that I kind of mislabeled it. But yeah, that was yes, correct. That
Either
was
way,
former.
that I don't know when that nebulous video is going to come up. I tend to plan things out, but I just while I had you, I wanted to make sure you knew that we can exchange info before I bounce out of here and before all hell breaks loose. Maybe I don't know.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what I got to start.
Okay. So
Also,
when you're
my kids just came. I'm gonna miss the. I don't know. Like, just pause for a second before you respond because I don't want to miss what you're saying.
all right.
Okay, give him a minute. But that is an interesting question. That does capitalism require
Incels.
well a permanent underclass? And given that the structure was originally founded, right, on a very racist system in America, does it, as it again, not speaking of the exceptions, but speaking in general, because we can point to exceptions here, Oprah being probably a very prominent, easily identifiable one. But when it comes to just in general, the permanent underclass, can we help Black people escape from that without dismantling capitalism? And I'm curious what Irrelevant would have to say once FD Signifier gets back.
I'm back.
Okay, so then you're unleashed, Irrelevant. Go ahead.
When we're talking about a permanent underclass, are we just referring to individuals in like poverty? Is that what we're referring to, or what are we referring to as a underclass?
The underclass is, I mean, it's a wide swath. It's mostly people without. We'll start with just people without access to capital, people without access to the means of production, people without access to self-determine how they're going to exist in the world here in the West.
So when you say without access, I'm assuming you mean without access to the point where in which you can have that surplus labor result in you not being able to have to work outside of it. Because there is, as I brought up earlier, there's many individuals who have, technically everybody has access to it if you have money and you have a stock market account or like
Quick point of information: surplus
Robinhood
value, not
account.
surplus labor. Sorry.
surplus value, right? So I'm assuming we would remove the individuals with retirement accounts or 401ks with stocks put inside of or money put in stocks, correct? We would not assume any of those people, or would we?
Not necessarily. I mean, I had retirement before I started doing YouTube as a teacher. You know, I still existed as a Black person experiencing racism.
Yeah.
And in relatively modest means. So it's you can't just you're not going to be able to just kind of like perfectly define what poverty looks like, but you know that the underclass based on their access to power.
So I personally, this was actually a bridge that I was going to share with President Sunday here. It was, I actually agree that there is a separate idea here, but it's not necessarily about people who own these shares in a company that can enable them to be able to rake in dividends or profits to the point where in which they don't have to work, but it's the people who have the opportunity to be able to do that. So I take, for example, individuals who are making millions of dollars in income. These people have an indescribably different life than probably every person. I don't know exactly how much money FD Signifier makes. I don't think
Much less
you're
than
making
everybody thinks.
I'm not sure you're making like $3 million a year or something like that. That's like the threshold. Okay, that's
I
like
would
the
be
threshold.
doing much less videos.
So that's kind of the threshold that I'm talking about, where at that point you are, like President Sunday referred to, you are choosing to work. At any point in time, you can take that money and you can put it in the market, and literally, I think at typical market rates, you'd be making like over $140,000 a year of passive income. Like that is just ridiculous, you know. At that point, and I would say it describes a different means of life.
If I can just amend that just a tiny quick bit. Not having to work is one defining element. Having negotiating power of a specific kind is another. The capitalist, for example, can refuse to purchase labor. The laborer cannot refuse to sell. They die under those conditions. Continue, please.
Sure. Okay, sure. So if we're just taking that group of people and we're assuming everybody outside of that group is the underclass, then I would say that that underclass, there's always going to be a mix of people within that underclass. I don't understand, though, if we're describing that, I don't understand how that is something that is going to necessarily perpetuate racism. Because if with that being the purview, we could have like dozens of black people who are making significant amounts of money, or sorry, not dozens. We could have a tremendous amount of, like, a majority of black people making a tremendous amount of money who are still in the underclass, but like, how does that perpetuate racism any more than any other system?
Generally speaking, those folks end up being class traders. Jay-Z, Killer Mike, Oprah, and
sorry,
so on.
Yeah, I'm not referring to. Okay, I guess I don't understand how being in an underclass perpetuates racism in comparison to.
I'll tag in President Sunday.
Thank you. Bless you, sir. Pleasure to meet you, by the way. One of the ways it does is as a consequence of being in an exploited class, i.e. you have to trade, but the person you're trading with does not have to trade back, which puts you at a disadvantage.
Sure.
Is that you accept a trade that is not equitable, and sometimes it is so inequitable that despite working your ass off, you remain in poverty, as many, many people do. And so if you have a group that has been slotted into the system as a disprivileged category of person in the community, that's going to replicate itself, because now you have people who have been slotted in by a racist system into a part of an exploited class, and as a consequence of being a part of that exploited class, they are under social conditions that hammer them in to poverty. The amount of stress, lack of nutrition, et cetera, that is begotten as a consequence of that is enormous. And that's why even under capitalism, even when formally there's total upward mobility in principle, there's not a law that says nobody can't ascend to any rank in society. Practically, it's impossible for most people. It's the very, very lucky few who actually make it up. Yeah.
So I can agree with some of those ideas. However, the pushback that I have is that if we agree that these individuals are in this underclass, where is the... I guess I'm just not understanding. I agree with the idea that the poor people are going to tend to stay poor. Rich people are going to tend to stay rich and stuff like this. Could we not incorporate systems within capitalism, maybe even make it a mixed system that makes it easier for people who are in poverty to be able to actually have an equality, or as close as we can, equality of opportunity?
Presumably, this is one of the premises of Marxism. So you don't have like a magical dissolution of capitalism. Instead, rather, you have the taking over of the means of production by organizations of workers, and so you have the exact same dynamic. However, you don't have two classes. That's one of the proposed solutions, and via that way you would eventually dissolve the distinction between those two classes. You wouldn't have individuals who exploit. No, go on, please.
Oh, what I'm referring to is a mixed system. So, like, honestly, my biggest issue with socialism as a concept is the idea that there is no organization of a business that I can run in which I can't just run it between me as a sole proprietor or between, like, me and my buddies. Right, that's one of my.
No. There's not a contradiction there. This is where basic political. I didn't mean to cut you off there. This is where basic political theory comes in handy, because you can have any organization, for example, that is democratically structured, nonetheless refer decisions to an executive body that is a minority within it. There's no contradiction there.
I wanted to hear from.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Why because he had a strong. That's not true, and I want him to elaborate.
It's just not true that you can't run a business as a sole proprietor under socialism, or that you and your buddies, like, that's you and your buddies running a business together was like the perfect, socialist bro imagination of how socialism could work. Is you and your boys get together and, I don't know, make hats or some shit, and you all democratically agree on how you're going to run that business. It's not a, so I mean, there are versions, I think that's planned economies and stuff like that. I am not, my expertise is in race. So I don't know enough about the history of how planned economies have failed and succeeded. So I know that's a thing, but the idea that you can't just run a business for profit under socialism is just, that's just not.
Can I add something to that very quickly, just to preempt confusion? When a business is run democratically, or when any entity is run democratically, all that means is that the source of the legitimacy of the deciding element within that organization is upstream from the generality, i.e. there is a vote, not just on every single decision. That's just a plebiscite. That's not democracy. There is a vote on who makes decisions as well. And so you can have a company capable of making unilateral decisions that is nonetheless democratically determined. This is in fact how all states work, and they can do things.
I guess if I'll let you finish, but then I have an interjection. So irrelevant, go, and then I have a question.
Okay, so the whole idea of me bringing that up is supposed to be not that you can't have a small group of people run a business, or that you can't start a business as a small group of people. It's that you can't stay as an individual making those unilateral decisions. It's that as you gain more employees, those people need bargaining power inside of that system. So like, let's say that I start my own business and I hire 100 people. Those people need to have a say in how that business is run in some kind of a democratic fashion under socialism. Whereas I think that if I'm putting significant amounts of my capital into this, I should be able to say how this thing is run. And I think there are other businesses that should be co-ops. I think there should be co-ops and traditionally run capitalist organizations, of course, with strong union or worker representation integrated within them.
I guess my question, I guess, to again try to tie this back to the topic at hand, is how a democratically controlled worker base is going to be any less racist. In fact, I would say that there is a large risk of it actually exacerbating racism.
Intrinsically, there's no reason to necessarily think that it would be. However, formally, a capitalist system has the perfect slot for that kind of discrimination and for that specific type of exploitation. In principle, you could have a capitalist system on the moon that is less racist than, I don't know, like a feudal system on Earth somewhere where there is a concept of race. The problem, though, is that given the presence of a racial categorization scheme that's sort of taken up, capitalism provides the absolute perfect avenue for that to inflect market outcomes and relationships between classes.
You keep mentioning this racial scheme, like this schematic of racism, the concept of race in general.
Yeah.
I don't think that we can, at least now, I don't think that without dismantling that, and I think we can dismantle that either under capitalism or socialism, I don't think that matters. But as long as that concept exists, in a socialist system, in a capitalist system, in any system you can think of, again, if you're doing things by democracy, by simply a plurality,
I agree, but
vote,
here's the catch.
It's going to mean that let me finish. That the majority, the people who there are more of them, are going to.
You've put your finger on something. You've put your finger on something
down
that I want to
against the people who are there less of them.
You've put your finger on something. You've put your finger on something very interesting. So. Interestingly enough, the notion of race as we conceive it today owes its origin to relationships between classes in the French Revolution, because the nobility considered themselves to be above the bourgeoisie. Why? Because they were part of the conquering Germanic peoples who took over France, whereas the bourgeoisie and the commoners, they were the people who were conquered. And there was almost a good-natured right of the victor relationship until the French revolutionists won, and they fled to Germany and then started to identify as a cope, as part of a superior group that had been overrun by the slave classes, and so on and so forth. And so what you end up having is a situation in which it is precisely the distinction between classes under a capitalist system that makes the racial categorization as such feasible historically. At least that's how it played out in our history.
Well, we can look at other... go ahead, FD, please.
If I could jump in. The thing that we're dancing around is that racism is just really convenient for capitalism. Capitalism requires the underclass, and it's like, okay, who are we going to choose for this? We have a whole legacy of literally dehumanized people that the vast majority of the country, including many of them themselves, see as lesser and under. And historically, and I want to be clear, like historically, is the irony, you know, because what's up, Brody? What you need? Quick. The irony, because when I first came, you know, Sunday wasn't here, and I'm not gonna like spark stuff with Sunday, but Sunday, I'm sure you're well aware that we tend to be on differing parts of we'll say ideological spaces on the air quotes online left. And
even enemies can show respect, friend. It's okay.
Yes, and even in that regard, right? That is historical. You know, historically, labor movements have excluded Black people. That is, you know, there's been riots based around labor movements and unions being pointed at African Americans who crossed the line because they weren't allowed to join the unions. You know, so capitalism, it incentivizes the maintenance of that system. And as we get into late capitalism, it exacerbates that incentive. It exacerbates that incentive. And so, like, you cannot just gloss over the fact that poverty looks a specific way here in America, and that the effects of that poverty lend itself to alienation, lend itself to anti-Blackness, lend itself to people like literally, if you go to that same era in the post-industrial era, I'm probably going to fuck this up. The point I'm trying to lead to is coming out of the New Deal, Italians, Irish, so many different, what we now consider white people weren't considered white up until around that point. And it was the New Deal that helped pull them into that white status, specifically because it was like, hey, we can either fight the Negroes, the Irish, the Italians, et cetera. We can either fight all of them at the same time, or we could cut off one leg, cut off one section of this problem and isolate it to make it the whole of the thing that we use to fuel this machine. So, like, we can't just gloss over the reason either Black people are all the underclass because there's something uniquely wrong with us, and I don't know if anyone's gonna abide by that conversation, and if you are, I'm gonna let you do that yourself.
Wick.
Or you have to recognize that there is a specific designated system of oppression that intertwines with capitalism to make that happen.
So I will recognize that there is a system that does intertwine with capitalism that does do that. That's not the question for me. The question is, would that system also not perpetuate itself if we had a different form of economic system? And I think it would. I think ultimately what is spurring on this specific situation is that you're right. People do. There is an underclass in this situation, but I think that's a social demand, not necessarily an economic demand. And yes, and in this case, there is an economic demand in capitalism to have that underclass. However, I think that social demand is there, and that's part of the reason why this underclass exists. I still think it would exist in a social.
I'm sorry, but even if I agreed that it was purely a social demand, which I don't.
Okay.
That social demand still would create economic consequences.
Correct. Yeah.
And reinforces everything else in the process. You know, the social demand for housing for Black people had an economic response fueled by racism and redlining. The economic demand for housing 40 years later by I'm a video essayist, so I need to remember the names. Fucking Robert Moses building suburbs outside of the cities. That was a economic and like city planning policy that had a explicitly racist manifestation. You know what I'm saying? So you can't separate these things. Like you can pull out one part or the other at a time to analyze and critique. But at the end of the day, once you put those things back into the equation, it's still an equation. it's still one unified function of how capitalism uses racism to fuel itself, at least here in America.
Yeah, when we're talking about this, we're talking about groups of people, like small groups of people, I'll admit, that profit off of these systems to be able to perpetuate like fear or animosity towards, a minority group, in this case, black people. Right? That's what we're speaking on. But that still exists even under a socialist or more democratic scheme. You still have a profit to be able to do that. And when the majority of people, in my opinion, are like turning a blind eye to social issues that really especially don't affect them, if it makes them money, I think what we're going to have is not only now a bunch of people who are like, you know what, black people, I'm not too sure about these people, whatever. And they also are now going to make a lot of money for turning a blind eye towards these injustices or inequalities, or even perpetuating them. You are paid actively more money for just going like, oh, fuck these people,
Sounds
on
like
an
my job.
individual basis. Yeah, I know, right? Like,
That's just yeah. There's a lot of I guess this mirrors a lot of what happens, I think, online, where we are incentivized to just
yes,
screw each other over all the time. We are incentivized to make different people less than us in order for clicks, views, etc. I think whether that be a capitalist system or a socialist system or any other system, that is going to happen. And I don't know. I remain unconvinced, I should say, that capitalism uniquely and especially perpetuates this. But I wanted to give. I'll hear you out Sunday.
Oh, just very quickly. I'm not making a statement. Yeah, but I'm not making a statement though. I do have to leave. I have another obligation coming up. Thank you for bringing me on, Wick. Good conversation, really. FD Signifier, hit me up sometime. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Beautiful. See you guys later. Okay. Average debate enjoyer, you had some issues and you wanted to come on and air them out, and I thought I would give you the opportunity to do so. So now's your chance. What do you got?
Absolutely. So first off, I hear a lot of things that are just kind of being accepted as fact that when you actually look at the history, some of them aren't necessarily as factual. Like there has to be a synonymous system with capitalism that perpetuates racism in order for it to succeed. That capitalism requires an underclass where it wouldn't be a class issue. What we see in Census Bureau data statistics is that this ends up more being an age issue. 54% of the country sees poverty for at least a year, and 73% then goes on to be at the top 20% of income earners for at least a year as well. Yeah, I got a new microphone guy in chat. So we see that this underclass isn't actually a class. It's more pertaining to people that are young, that don't have a lot of work experience, that don't have a lot of work skills. And once somebody builds up those skills in this market economy that we're in, you see them, no matter their race, no matter their socioeconomic background, pushed up through the ranks. And that's why we see the vast majority of every racial demographic is middle class or up. And when age is accounted for, we see a lot of people that aren't white kind of per capita being almost the same, except for the extremely wealthy. Now, a lot of, like, I made a video trying to debunk 52% of murders come from 12% of the population. And how I did that was I went through a lot of the data with age demographics. So we see that Black people repopulate at a much higher rate than their percentage of society, whereas white people repopulate at a much significantly lower rate than their percentage of society. So that being said, we're going to have a much younger Black demographic, more prone to crime, more prone to higher car insurance, more prone to bad credit. So I hear an assertion like redlining was predicated simply on racism, and then you actually look at who was redlining. It was mostly Black-owned banks with Black workers that were redlining other Black people coming in. Sorry, I ranted.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I want to give space for 𝕬𝖎, FD, and Irrelevant to respond to that. So go ahead, 𝕬𝖎, if you got something to say. I know you.
I'm good.
Fair enough.
I was gonna say there's a lot there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been listening for a while, so I ranted a bit.
Fine.
My bad.
𝕬𝖎, go ahead.
I mean, but even the Black people that were complicit in redlining would be class traders.
But if they're bank owners, then they're not in the same class. Like, you're talking about higher class of people saying you don't have the credit score because maybe you're younger, maybe you didn't do the necessary
Wait, can I-
steps to get your credit up high.
Go ahead.
Yeah, can I take?
Irrelevant.
So
Right.
I would say I personally I don't really care if they're black business owners or something. They're perpetuating a system that doesn't enable individuals to be able to get self-actualized, to be able to get the property that they you know uh, otherwise have the means to be able to acquire. The only missing link is the you know. Uh, melanin content in their skin, and so there is that bit. And when you're talking about the availability for black people to self-actualize inside of the market, and a lot of them being younger and then therefore being prone to more crime, and so these stats and numbers or whatever are leaning more heavily towards that can be the case, that there are some of those issues. However, like we would state that some of these things are still exacerbated by oh nice dog exacerbated by racial prejudices and things like that, and are just genuinely going to be harder for them to be able to accomplish X, Y, and Z achievement on the basis of that. Now, I'm not going to say that's specifically because of capitalism. Is that what you were necessarily getting at? Because I'm not going to lie to you. When you were going off and you were talking about those things, it made it sound like it was like essentially racism wasn't that holding black people back at all. Not even that it was racism in a capitalist sense, but just like racism is.
No, I was trying to address things that were brought up that I heard. I was kind of hitting on like 6 different points I heard in the conversation. That was specifically about redlining. So to your point about the system not perpetuating the individual, we're talking about credit score. And credit score is specifically set up to take an individual's actions into account and attribute them a score based on their actions. So I would argue that credit score is the exact opposite of what you
if it applied properly, it would be. Let me give you an example. One of my best friends growing up, I think he has like one of the highest credit scores you can have. He has like 866 or something crazy, right? He has a very high credit score. You want to know how he got it? His father took out a credit card in his name when he was growing up, and then just started spending money on the credit card and paying it off. He didn't even build the credit, right? My mother didn't even know to do that. My mother didn't know how to do that. And a part of that was probably because of the education that she was given as a result of being a Hispanic Native American woman, right? Like there's probably some bit of there. Now, whether or not she was white, I'm not saying like no white person, every single white person knows how to do this, but the idea that it would probably be harder to have access to this information on the basis of race, I think that's probably a fair give. No?
I would completely disagree. I think we're talking about small percentages of these communities and ignoring the whole that every racial demographic usually does pretty well economically. We're looking at 16% of Black Americans in poverty and 11% of just Americans in general in poverty. We're talking about minuscule amounts.
Yeah, but that's a disparity though. If 11% of the general population is in poverty, but then you see a 5% difference, a 5% increase within a specific demographic, does that not indicate at least some sort of problem? Something is not, something's going wrong.
No. That's kind of what I was getting at earlier. You can't take 2 demographics and just say 1 to 1 they're the same, and then if we find any differences, we attribute it to racism in the gaps. When you're looking at
what is the difference?
Age is. I kind of got to that earlier in my big rant. It's age.
Why do you think
one of the biggest racial disparities is lifespan?
Yes, I was going to say, why do you think that disparity in lifespan exists? Is my point bouncing off of
that? Well, that's not what the age of the demographic is. The age of the demographic has to go to repopulation rates, and when you have Black people repopulating at higher than their percentage of the population of the nation, where other demographics are repopulating at lower rates, you're just going to have more young Black people in today's society. But if we actually look at death rates of like things like heart attack, if you look at white and Black death rates and you omit one thing, they're almost exactly on par. The only one thing would be young people dying in gun crime.
Yeah. And why do Black people disproportionately, or why is there disproportionate amounts of gun violence?
Bro, if I could answer that question, I could solve like the world's problems. There's a lot of reasons you could say that. You could say lack of education. You could say a culture.
Yeah. Let's give them a chance.
Why is there a lack of education?
Wait.
A lot of people want to respond. Let's go around the room. You wait first, then we'll go FD, and then Irrelevant can respond to this and maybe answer.
What do you mean by culture?
There's a lot of different. The argument that I go with, or that I've heard, is rap music. Rap music endorses violence.
What the number one consumers of rap
Well,
music?
It doesn't matter who the number one
It
consumer is.
completely
It actually
matters.
very
If you're
much
gonna-
matters.
If
no?
you're going to point that out as an indicator of culture for Black people, and to gloss over the fact that white youth are the number one consumers of rap music, it's a bad faith argument. If you can't,
Is this per
ignore-
capita, or is this just
This
white
is
people
this,
buy more albums? Because there's
it-
it's set 5 times the size of the demographic. I haven't seen this data, but
It doesn't matter if we're saying that there is a specific correlation or causal factor for rap music and a air quotes cultural issue around gun violence or crime or whatever.
it's not the
doesn't matter per
consumption
capita.
so much. It's the people. It's that it's being made. It's that it's being endorsed. This is a particular lifestyle by a certain type of people. In a
Why
certain area.
why are white youth not at large scales engaging in that lifestyle? Why are the white rappers that we see paying Black drill rappers to hang out with them so they can get street cred instead of actually getting in the streets themselves?
Well, I mean, anyone that's actually listened to rap music knows that most of these people are just making shit up. Like, there was some woman I watched an interview over in New York saying like the only one that was actually on the streets doing what they said they were was Cameron and Dipset, and the rest of them were just making shit up. So I would say it's all clout. I would say that they're all trying to push their fame up to a degree.
Okay, let's try relevant. Go ahead,
Okay.
and then
so-
Majin, welcome.
Hey,
So
thank you, Wick.
I feel like this is now kind of pushed. ushered
Now we're
into a little
roasting
bit of a
this guy,
different-
but go ahead.
Yeah, it's
You
now,
have united me in irrelevant.
Yes, very much on this. Yes,
I'm kind of here
because
for this too.
Yeah,
Listen, I'm about to. This is.
I understand.
I'm about to head out. Peace and blessings, everybody, and appreciate you.
Yeah,
letting me
no,
on.
thanks for hopping on
Much love.
anytime.
We're still doing this centrist video whenever I get around to it.
Just hit me up, and I'm happy to
Irrelevant. I don't know how to. I guess I can click here and send you a message. Okay, cool. All right, peace and blessings, Joe.
Okay.
See you later.
Much love. See you.
Okay, irrelevant. Go on, and
yeah.
we'll go another 20 minutes or so. Then we'll probably wrap it up. But
Okay, so we're talking about music. Actually, something I will grant is there's media I do think affects you, and the way that you view the world and stuff like that. But again, I do think a large question is, or a large part of that is, who consumes that music. When we look at also young white people consuming this music, we need to ask ourselves why we're not seeing this massive disparity at these specific rates that we see the Black populace with. I will offer you what I consider to be a counter for some of the gun violence and things like that we see inside of the Black community, which is the rates of poverty amongst the Black community, the antagonism amongst the Black community in regards to the police force, and like the perpetuation of them inside of the media as being like other or very criminal-esque, and just the interpersonal idea that Black people tend to be more violent. I know growing up in a community that was it was mixed, but I had a disproportionate amount of Black people. There was a lot more pressure when I was in that community to be able to fit a much more tough, hyper masculine idea or framework of being a man than there is going to other communities. It's almost like a culture shock moving out of these different places, because in this area, you're Black, you gotta act this way. You have to act tough, otherwise people are gonna take shit from you, and you gotta do that, and that kind of perpetuates some of these problems that we're seeing. I think this is more likely to explain some of the issues we see in the Black community when it comes to gun violence or violence in general than music.
Yeah, as I said, there's a multitude of reasons. I just pulled one off the top of my head. I'm not trying to boil it down to a single factor, but I'm more like the consumption of art, which it is art. It's
Sure.
rhythm and poetry. The consumption of art doesn't necessarily jurisdict the actions of the people listening to it. It's more about the feelings being poured into it by the person making that art. That's the point more that I was getting at. But that all being said, poverty is another. So this is something that we've seen in the news lately. A couple people stealing, shoplifting. One lady drove at a cop, the cop shot her. It's controversial right now. I'm not picking a side on it, but I'm just saying that this is something that's been kind of perpetuated in the media lately. You see a lot of people saying just to allow shoplifting. Well, we see a lot of businesses moving out of these of these areas where crime is high, looting is high, and whatnot. And that if the businesses move out, there's less jobs, there's less ways to make money. The businesses that do stick around have to make up for their losses of theft somehow, so they raise the prices of their goods. So we see poverty being made worse by crime. So, there are some factors that crime is caused by poverty, yes, but I'd say it's the exact opposite more often than not, that poverty is caused by crime. Like crime brings poverty to certain areas. And as far as the police go, like there's all sorts of polling data out there. I went through this with Defund the Police. Polling data broken down by racial demographic. 76% of Black Americans want more funding or the same amount of funding to local police, and almost I think it was 70% of people generally like their local police. It's the police over there that they've never encountered that they think are the bad guys. Like if you ask people about their local police stations, they're usually pretty happy with the results that they have of all racial demographics as well. New York City, you go into situations where we see stop and frisk. Well, Giuliani came out. Was it Yeah, Rudy Giuliani. No, it was after him. It was Bloomberg. Bloomberg had that quote that people quote all the time, talking about how you can give a picture to the police, and 90-something% of the time, it's always going to be right. It's like a Hispanic or Black young man between the ages of 15 and 26, and people call them racist for it. But then you look at the Comstat data from New York City, and it's like 92%, 93%, 88% every year that it's like a non-white youth male in between those ages that has an illegal gun on them. So stop and frisk, at least in its inception, was targeting who is disproportionately more likely to carry an illegal gun.
I want to give a chance. First of all, if you have a response to that, irrelevant, go ahead. But I want to get 𝕵𝖎𝖎 in here if he wants.
So one of the biggest issues with policing is that I forget, there was a specific term for it, but it's when you look for crime, you're going to find it. Essentially, is the idea that the more police you put inside of an area, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It will always justify itself, because there's always crime that you're missing, and putting more people on the job will make it so you find more crime, and then you will think, oh fuck, we need more people, and then it's into this perpetual cycle of just constantly finding more and more things. Now, when you're talking about the disproportionate rate of people with an illegal firearm on them and things like that, yeah, I don't necessarily disagree that there's going to be higher rates of illegal firearm ownership, probably amongst minority youth. However, I think a part of this, it comes from many different factors. One of the most tangible, I think, for it is a lot of youth, minority youth, entering gangs because of a lack of a sense of community inside of either their school or possibly their home. A lack of a father inside of the father figure or parental figure inside of your home can leave you feeling kind of lost and without purpose. And unfortunately, literally, you can look at a part of these gang recruitment tactics is to make them feel like they are a part of the community and things like that. And that is obviously going to therefore be disproportionate amongst
𝕵𝖎𝖎.
minority communities.
So, me and Sola speak to this a lot. There is no such thing as gang recruitment tactics, all right? You grow up in a neighborhood. You hang out with your boys, all right? You're kicking it. You pick it back being bull. You know what I'm saying? Y'all all grow up. Y'all ain't got the same. Y'all ain't in sports. Y'all ain't doing nothing like that, right? But y'all out on the streets and y'all getting in trouble. Y'all being boys, boys of summer, right? And you're out there doing stuff. Eventually, that starts to escalate, right? And you start taking higher risks for higher rewards, because guess what? You're broke. You know what I'm saying? You and your homies broke. Y'all ain't got money to facilitate the needs to go out there, right? You're not recruited. It's just more like this is what the society kind of molds you into be, right? And then go to kind of touch base on this. I was trying to get my thoughts together while we were going here, so I know I'm kind of rambling here. The guy with the glasses. That's two guys with the glasses. Not irrelevant. Not all the other guy. When it comes to WhickTV too. God damn it. When it comes to like the crime stats, that has to do with those places being heavily policed. Now, granted, I live on the West Coast version of New York, right? I live in Portland, Oregon, right? And I can go to areas like Oswego, some of these white suburban areas. I can act a fool and know the cops ain't gonna show up. Well, I'll be all right. You know what I'm saying? Because they're not policing that area. You know what areas they are policing though? Heavy and just looking for anything. Like just shitty pullovers, stop and frisk, all sorts of the poor neighborhoods. And this is what's crazy about it. Y'all act like crime doesn't happen in these rich neighborhoods. We could even go to like how houses were getting broken into in like Calabasas. There was like a string of like famous people that are, there's major crimes out there too, but they're just not heavily policed. And I'm sure if it was, we'd probably start seeing a lot of domestic violence abuse, child abuse, tons of stuff that we just don't see record of because, hey, guess what? People aren't calling police on family members. They're just not going to do that.
That's fair. Okay, so I kind of can address both of your points in one part here. So
before you do that, thank you for the Prime sub 7. Gang, if you're enjoying this content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Give me more money. Subs, bits, super chats, etc. Thank you. Okay, go.
I agree with your gang recruitment point, so I can't really speak to that so much. But in terms of like the seeking more crime, we don't. CompStat in New York City isn't based on arrests. It's based on victimization surveys, which don't tend to change the more you look into them. They tend to stay relatively the same, and people are allowed to just go ahead and submit what happened to them. So these victimization surveys are what cause police to be distributed the way they are, and how they are distributed isn't just crime generally, it's based on crime, violent crime. So I've seen data.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen data to suggest that like both white and black demographics smoke weed at a very similar rate, but the arrest rate for blacks are much higher due to the fact that there's already more police in predominantly black neighborhoods, due to the fact that there's more violent crime, such more police. So
but like I said, when it comes to violent crime, let's just say even domestically, right? I even like, and this is kind of like, I don't even know the right word for this, right? I'm not 100% on this. We'll just say that, right? But I'm pretty sure when it comes to like domestic violent issues in like, urban communities, black communities and stuff, it's usually when the cops are called, it's a third party, right? It's not somebody in the house calling the cops, right? And generally, when you're going to look at these places in like these richer suburban areas, like, granted, in these smaller areas, this is more dense, right? More populated, right? People are living in like little boxes right next to another little box, right? And these other in suburbia, right? Big houses, space, ain't nobody gonna hear you yell, right? You have to rely if that's whatever the study or crime stat was, right? It relies on people snitching out their family members, right? Because it's domestic violence, right? Nobody's gonna go out there, and this is one of the things that is like next to like victims of like sexual assault, right? This is one of these things that don't get talked about, right? Nobody's going out there saying, "Hey, yo, my husband's over there putting his foot knee deep in my ass every night." You know what I'm saying? They just let it be.
I saw that video.
Let it.
You do have a point. That being said, this is the entire argument behind sex ed in like middle schools, is because we keep catching people will rat out their families when they realize there's an injustice being done to them. We catch a lot more sexual assault against children because we're teaching young people how to recognize that they're being sexually abused in the household. So it does happen. You may be right, not to some degree. I'd have to look at data. I'm 100% data driven, so I haven't seen anything to suggest who is calling the cops on domestic abuse more often. I have no idea. You could be 100% right.
Okay, gang. This has been swell. We're kind of circling the drain here, and I gotta eat. I got things to do. This has been quite the conversation. It's been a roller coaster. We started off a little slow, but we've picked it up. I think it's been good content. I've enjoyed having you all out here. I want to give everyone here a closing statement, especially Irrelevant and 𝕾𝖍, since they were kind enough to be here from the jump. So we're gonna start with them, and then we're gonna let you two shout yourselves out as well, just for being here. So we're gonna start with 𝕾𝖍, then we're gonna go to Irrelevant, and then the other two. So 𝕾𝖍, final thoughts, closing thoughts, and where can people find you if they want to?
Like I said, obviously username is 𝕾𝖍1992. I'm around Twitch. I don't actually stream content, but yeah, I guess we just want to talk, DM me or whatever. But yeah, like I said, I'm just an everyday person, I guess trying to make my world a better place, trying to trying to, improve others' lives as well as my own. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. Again, I'm on Twitch. Username's 𝕾𝖎𝖎𝖙1992. Also on Twitter, same thing. If you want to talk to me, DM me, whatever. I don't care.
Okay. No, thanks for being here. And again, I really want to say I know this was very last minute, so I appreciate you being willing to fill in. Ninetales and Aston Mac ditched me, and that's a problem, especially since this whole panel was their idea. I set it up for them specifically, and they decided to fuck me over. So, fuck them.
Well, Wick, if that ever happens, all you got to do is call on Majin.
I will keep that in mind. Irrelevant. Go ahead.
I am Irrelevant, 𝐴𝐻_relevant, on Twitch, Kick, YouTube. I stream primarily on Kick because it's a lot more of a free platform for me to be able to work with people, whoever I choose. My roommate is also banned on Twitch. Yikes. So, it's a little bit easier to collaborate with him on there. Closing thoughts about this topic is that I think that capitalism can be a perfect economic system for being able to alleviate racism, just like any other system. I see absolutely no evidence that swapping our economic system would do a better job of alleviating racism. And something that we never really got to that is really important to me is the idea that swapping the economic system would almost certainly take a tremendous amount of time, tremendous amount of effort, and probably there'd be a tremendous loss, whether that be human life or resources or something. There's almost certainly, like, changing your entire economic system is never, ever, ever, ever going to be a smooth process. So I'm very hesitant towards the idea of just swapping our entire means of production and just hoping for the best. Also, Majin, it looks like the cops got called at your fucking place. It's like red, then blue, then red, then blue. Does anybody see that? It looks like the cops are pulling up right now.
It's a shitty camera. I think it's because I upped the sharpness on the camera, and now it's getting that little. I know. I've seen it too. I've seen it too, dog.
Okay. Stay safe.
Speaking of getting arrested and things like that, Majin, go ahead.
That's why it took me so long to get on here, man.
Are you still banned from Destiny's Discord, by the way?
I am.
Wow. Okay.
Still banned.
Wow,
That's I know, that's crazy.
I'll talk to him next time I see him. Okay.
I hope so, man, because we had a nice conversation.
I thought it was nice. Did you see that Irrelevant? Oh, did Irrelevant?
I never saw it.
Oh,
I never saw it.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
I thought it was a respectful conversation. Forethought came in and banned him and Solus both. Just boom. Just sent them to the
What was the combo about?
Whether or not DGG is racist. The Discord
and our experience in there, we actually had stuff.
But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. We could do this later.
I
I can send you the videos. Irrelevant. I can send you the videos.
Send me the videos. Yeah.
But everybody knows me. This is Majin. You can find me on Twitch as Majin 𝐵𝖚𝐻. Wick, the reason why it took me so long because I was over there being a punk. I ain't even gonna lie. I saw like FD signifiers, President Sunday, and Our Relevant was in here. I was like, oh, I'm gonna get shitted on if I say anything to these guys. So I was being a straight punk. You guys parallax. I was like, nah. But I finally worked up the courage to come in here. It was really nice for the opportunity and to meet all y'all, dope. I wish I could have, gave some more stuff.
All good. Next time we'll get you in earlier, buddy. But for now, in fact, I'll DM you after this because I might have something for you tomorrow, but we'll see. Average debate enjoyer, go ahead.
I got a YouTube channel. I try to make videos that are very packed full of information, a little boring, but cover electoral politics, economics, and I want to do an open source policy debate thing. So I started making up policies. If anyone ever wants to watch one and jump in, I'm down. Closing statement, I don't really have one, so I'm just going to make one point. Capitalism is the best system to work against racism. When your hiring pool is based off of skin color, you are potentially limiting yourself from the best candidate for that job because of your inherent biases. And capitalism makes it so the markets punish you for that decision.
Okay.
That's what I got.
Thanks for being here, gang. Who we right now to? Who we going to? Who's streaming right now?
Also, I sent you a friend request because it's not letting me send it without it. So
Yeah, you guys can do that on your
gotcha.
own time. Let's go to, what do we think? First person who shouts someone out in chat. That's who we're gonna raid. Give me a name. Nina? Okay, I guess we're going to Nina. Remember to tell people that this is a hate raid. Let her know that we are here to hate her, and spam those emotes if you got them. Thanks again. We'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to talk about optics and advocacy. We're going to have food stamps, so we're going to have Vivian. It'd be fun. We'll also pull in Stardust and maybe Flashing. We'll see. Anyway,
Alrighty.
for now though, I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Again, thanks again for coming, Gag.